Lego My Jameso.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Lego My Jameso. I'm starting this episode outside today and I'm going to continue to show you how to hang a Lego ceiling train in your house. Or wherever, whatever room you want to hang that in. I'm going to start out today and talk to you about tools, but then I'm also going to talk to you about material, hardware, and then mounting techniques depending on what building or home or room you're in. So without further ado, you're going to need a couple tools. Two tools that you really need are a combination square and a tape measure. You can get away without using a combination square because you can use other pieces of wood to angle things, but having something to measure is key. Any tape measure will do. You probably already have one, maybe your parents do, maybe a friend does if you can't buy one, but a tape measure is great, and I'm sure you'll find ways to use it everywhere after you own it. And then something to write with. Safety glasses are very important. Gloves, they come in handy. That way you can prevent slivers and nicks and cuts to your fingers, and even prevent just getting marks on you. I always get marks on me. You don't necessarily need a stud finder, but I find it's great to have one because mounting into studs is much more sturdy than mounting into drywall or other materials. A drill. If you have a drill, great. If you don't, I'm not saying you should buy one, but there are cheap ones out there, both new and used. It's just great to have a screw gun or a drill, whatever you call it, for mounting into, drilling into the wall, drilling into your the pieces, and then mounting. Last but not least, you need something to cut your material with. If you're not somebody that owns a saw like this, if you don't own something like this, that's okay. You don't need to go buy one, but I do recommend a handsaw if you don't have other power tools. A handsaw can get the job done. When I built my first train, I bought boards just like this and I cut them where I needed to, and I was even able to make notches out of them. They don't look perfect at all. I definitely was not as great of a carpenter back then, but it got the job done for the build I wanted to have at the time. So those are kind of the tools you need, or things you should have for this build. Something else that will come in handy is a level. Again, you don't need to buy one of these. You can use simple string to create or to make level lines. I'll show you how to do that in next week's video when I actually show you how to start building this train on your ceiling or along your wall, wherever. Okay, so that was the tool section. I know I said you need a couple things, and if you don't have the tools, that's okay. Feel free to ask a family member, relative, a friend. I'm sure somebody might be able to lend you the tools you need. But if not, a handsaw is about $20. Tape measure you can get for $10. And you'd probably spend $50 on tools because there's cheap electric drills you can find for around $25. But if that's even too much money, check out yard sales, Facebook Marketplace, or even Craigslist. There's people all the time that are selling older tools that they're great for the project like this if you only need it once or twice. So don't go out and spend a whole lot of money if you don't have to, right? All right, so now it's time for me to talk about materials. Materials are all depending on tools, what you want your finished product to be, and cost. I plan on running 2 rails here, so that's why I got this thick board. But when I had my first train on the ceiling, I did this. And this, I believe, is a 4 or 5 inches. At the end of the video, I'll show you costs and images of these online where I purchased them and what I recommend. But when I was building my first train, I only used a handsaw. So I didn't want to purchase lumber that was too thick that I'd have to cut here. I only wanted to make these cuts. So I purchased these boards, and they were 8 feet in length, and they worked really well. So if you don't have a lot of tools or you don't have a table saw, purchase something that you want just as your finished product. That way you don't have to make other cuts. You can paint this, sand it, and cut it this way, but you don't want to buy something if you're going to have to cut it this way if you don't have the proper tools for that. If you do have a table saw, another creative way of doing something is you can buy simple studs, which might save you some money, and you could cut it into 3s. So you could have 3 half-inch sections. They won't really be half-inch sections because if you're making 2 cuts, you're subtracting the dimension of your saw blade and then dividing that into 3. But just to get you an idea, if I was to cut this, and I'm going to, and I'll show you in next week's video when I have these cut and when I'm mounting them, what they look like. But this will essentially now be 3 boards, which is a great way to save money because if you can get one of these for, let's say it's $6 versus one of these might even cost $8. It might be more. This is definitely nicer, it's smoother, but there's options out there. And when I cut this with the saw, it might not even work really well. So we'll see. You can pick up wood sheeting, or plywood in multiple dimensions, sizes, material, and this might be cheaper because you can buy a section and then use your handsaw to cut this into multiple lengths. So you can do whatever you'd like. In next week's video, I'm actually going to show you every single method. So I'm going to show you how I cut this and used it as for the train. I'll show you how I split this 2x4 in sections and used that wood. And I'll show you then just kind of how I have with these other ones that I only have to make a few cuts. So those are pretty much the different ways you can use for lumber. If you really wanted to try and save even more money, you can take cardboard probably and cut it into lengths and glue multiple sheets together, staggering how the orientation of the corrugation goes. But I recommend getting actual wood for this project, and I'll do costs at the end here to show you kind of what you're looking at. All right, so now that you understand what tools to use and kind of what material you should use or what options you have out there for you, the next step is hardware. What do you use to mount this to the wall? So there are plenty of options you can do, and you can even do ones that I don't even mention because you've really plenty of different opportunities for doing things. What I've done with my previous train was I used these 2.5-inch metal brackets. These worked great for this 3.5-inch board. They have enough structure. They were less expensive than these decorative shelving brackets, and I think they do offer more structure, and you can allow more weight on them than these. We are only hanging a Lego train, so it's very minimal weight compared to things people hang on the wall. Earlier I talked about lumber and that I said this was 4 to 5 inches. So for store length, when you're purchasing it, this would be a 1-inch by 4-inch board, and then this would have been 8 feet long. Again, I'll show the costs in these in the end of the video, but the actual dimensions are 3.5 inches here and only 3/4 of an inch here. And that is because when wood's going through mills, it's sized down. So always check there's a different dimension that shows the actual length of each board online or even on the barcode at the store. That way you understand, okay, what length is it actually? Because you would hate to buy a board that you think is 6 inches that can hold 2 rails when in reality it's going to be 5.5 inches and won't hold those 2 rails next to each other. All right. So like I said, you can do multiple different types of brackets. These ones, they don't look as great, but they're simple or cheaper to just buy and put up on the wall. They work well when putting them on the board here. These ones are larger, so you can see that's too massive for the one set of rail, but I'm going to use these on the larger board I have for 2 sets of rail. I picked up a few of these decorative shelving brackets. I'll show you how to mount those as well in next week's video. But these ones, there's 2 different sizes. The reason I didn't use these originally was because cost, and they didn't fit with this size board, so it was too long. So they would look nice, but if you're only doing 1 set of rail, you might not want to go with these. You might be better off doing 2.5-inch brackets and buying your own pack of screws. With screws, I typically do 1/2 inch or sometimes 3/4 inch, depending on what size block you're drilling into. Since this is 3/4 inches, we could do 3/4 inch screws instead of the 1/2 inch ones here, because after they go through both your bracket and your wood, it would not go through this 3/4 inch board. So they both work really well, and there's different options there. When you mount into the wall, however, you want longer screws. So there's 4-inch wood screws you could do. Typically your drywall screws like 2.5 inches. They work really well, but any sort of variety. I mean, I've mounted before with very long wood screws if I'm in a wood stud, but I've also used these drywall studs, and those are probably 1.5 inches if I was to guess, and they work just as well. So you want longer screws when you're in the wall, shorter screws when mounting into the top of your wooden track system. All right, so I talked about different mounting techniques. So it really depends on what type of wall you have. I know in here in this garage it is drywall and stud framing. Where I have drywall, it's best you pick up a set of drywall anchors. Again, any brand will work. You want to pay attention to this number value here. That will correspond to the size screw you have. This is a number 10. So with the number 10, I want these drywall anchors, and I'll find that that'll work well. So I just picked up a couple of these because I will be using them in next week's video, and I also use them in other projects. If you are unsure what your wall is, drill a hole through it and see, okay, is it plaster, drywall? If you do have a stud finder and you could find out where a stud is, mark those and just put these on studs. I typically do a bracket every 32 inches because your studs are on 16 center typically, and you don't need one every single stud, but every other stud is perfect for the train system we're doing. If you plan on doing more than 2 sets of rail, then you want every stud probably, and different size brackets. If you're drilling into plaster, you can still use drywall anchors. There's recommendations and specifications for whichever ones you buy. They'll tell you what size drill bit to use. I'll show you this next week when I actually do the work. But you drill a hole, you put your drywall anchor in, you mount your bracket, and then you put the screw through the bracket and it goes into the anchor. And they hold pretty well. If you're drilling into masonry, use masonry screws. There's definitely plenty of other videos online for searching construction methods for anchoring things in, but your best bet's a wall stud, if not drywall anchors. So the last piece is our ceiling train. The ceiling train is a little more involved, but it's not too hard. The biggest thing is figuring out, can you do it with the ceiling you have? So again, drill a small hole through your ceiling to see what material you're working with. Some ceilings, it might not be worth hanging them there, or you have to get a stud finder and find your joists. And if you find the joist in the ceiling, then you could definitely anchor them in. But if you're not looking for joists, again, I'll show the ceiling part. I don't know if it'll be next week, but it'll definitely be the video after that. And to do that, I am trying this for now, but I picked up some wire. It can hold up to 10 pounds. So I'm going to cut pieces of wire. I'll use these screw eyes, I think they're called. Yeah, screw eyes. I used these on the last bridge I had. Screw these into the ceiling, then I'd wrap the wire around them. The wire would come down around under my bridge and it would hold. And I do two connections at the ceiling. You don't want one in the middle like a triangle. You want them to go straight up. That way you could also bring your train closer to the ceiling without having issues of the train ever hitting that wire. So I'll show you how to, that's a little more involved. I'll definitely show that when I get to that point in one of these videos. But I'm going to use the metal wire for now, but previously I used actual just mason line that's not meant to be load bearing or have any weight on it. But for this lightweight decorative, train piece, it works really well. And I'd even leave the train parked on that floating bridge sometimes, and there was never a problem. All right, so that's, I think, about it. With brackets, again, if you don't want to buy brackets and you're really good with carpentry, you can figure out a way to make your own wood molding brackets and hook these into, if you hooked one board into another board like this and then mounted that to the wall, you could do a lot just with wood. It's really what your skill level is and what money you have and how much time you're willing to spend on this project. But all in all, you're going to want to have the correct tools, the lumber I mentioned, and then some sort of brackets that will work with the lumber you have. So this would not work with this, but something like this would work great. And then drywall anchors, whichever size screws you decide to go with, get the correct anchors for them if you're drilling into drywall or other materials, but typically you want to go for your wall studs. Now I'm going to discuss a couple of wood options and the prices. This is a simple wood stud. This works really well if you have a table saw because you could split this into 2 or 3 pieces for around $5. Up next, this is what I used for my original train. It's more expensive, but the wood's really nice and you can cut it with just a simple handsaw. If you are limited to a handsaw, I recommend purchasing lumber like this that is already pre-cut to size. And lastly, you could also do this with a handsaw, but you could get a sheet of plywood. On the left, they're only 4 feet long, and on the right, they're 8 feet. That's why there's the price difference. But I'd recommend getting an 8-foot long one, and then you'd cut it into 12 boards. That's the best bang for your buck with a handsaw. Buying a 2x4 and cutting it into 2 or 3 pieces is the cheapest method, but it requires a table saw. And next week, we're going to find out if it really works as well as I think it will. Thanks again for checking out this video. I hope it helped you. If it did, please like it. Please subscribe if you want to see more. And leave a comment if you have any questions or concerns or just words of advice, I guess. Thanks, guys.